And I'm Ada Fitzgerald. I am the proprietor here at Main Street Books in Davidson, North Carolina, which is funny that I have to say that now that we're doing things virtually, because usually we all know where we are when we're having one of these events. But tonight we are celebrating a much and long anticipated book release, the release of Goddess in the Machine by Lora Beth Johnson. Lora Beth is near and dear to our hearts here at Main Street Books. She is an incredibly hardworking, fierce advocate who shows up at Main Street Books for New Release Tuesday nearly every week. She is out there supporting the writing community. She is at home teaching and writing and teaching and writing. She's a genius. And this has just been a journey that's been really, really, really wonderful to be on with her. And we are really glad to be able to share it now with people all over the country. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. We are in the company also of two other really wonderful young adult authors, Beth Revis, Emily Suvada. They're going to be in conversation with Lora Beth Johnson. That is an extraordinary treat for us tonight. Without further ado, I'm going to turn the mic over to Emily Suvada. Thank you.
Hi all, thanks so much for joining us. I have known Lora Beth for a really long time now. I was going to do the math on how many years, but let's just say a lot of years. We've been critique partners through that time and very dear friends. And I have loved this book since the very first pages and first draft that I had the privilege of reading. And I still want to hold it over everybody's head that I read the early drafts of this book. So, But what I want to do is, before we get into questions, I just want to read from the opening of this book, just so that you can all get immersed in the beautiful language, the beautiful words, and the world that we're about to enter through conversation. So this is from chapter 1. Now, there is a dictionary definition at the top of chapter 1, and that's very important. The definition is wake. The etymology, Anglo-Saxon wakan, to be born. Possible adaptation from Icelandic vok, meaning an opening in the ice. Definitions: to be roused from sleep, to revive, reanimate, to return to life. The consequences of a body in movement, or a vigil by the body of the dead. Ominous. When Andromeda woke, she was drowning. They'd warned her this would happen, that her lungs would burn and her eyes would sting and she'd have to fight for that first breath. But you must take it, they said. If you don't, your lungs will collapse and we'll have to put you in a coma and just hope for the best. Okay, maybe those weren't their exact words. She'd pulled in a breath like they told her. It burned, it stung, she fought. Water flooded her lungs and the bitter taste of saline filled her mouth. Something was wrong, something she couldn't quite place. Her fist shot out, grasping for help, but it slammed into something solid. There it was, the wrongness. 10-inch thick metallic glass reinforced with veins of diamond dust, latched together with hinges of a tantalum tungsten alloy. Supposed to be yawning open when she woke, but it wasn't. It was still closed, cocooning her in cold metal and melting cryoprotectants. Calculations fired in her brain, searching for missing information, evaluating variables, solving for X. She'd just been put to sleep and now she was drowning. No. It only felt like she'd just been put to sleep. It had actually been 100 years. And now she was waking up and, oh God, naked, but her chamber was still closed. Something was definitely wrong. And if that's not an opening, then I don't know what is. So
that was beautifully read, Emily. That was beautifully read.
I want to hand over to LB to tell us a little bit more about the book, about how it came to be, and about what's in store.
Thank you, Emily. So Goddess in the Machine is about a girl who goes into cryogenic stasis in order to go on a journey across the stars to be one of the first humans to colonize another planet. And she's going to be in sleep for 100 years and supposed to wake up to this new paradise. But when she wakes up, she's on a barren desert planet. It's been 1,000 years and everyone is calling her goddess. And so she's woken by Jade, who is a banished prince from a nearby city-state, and he convinces her to go back with him so that he can retake his throne. And she quickly finds out that if she doesn't keep up the rules of being a goddess, if she doesn't perform these miracles and save the people like she's expected to, they're going to kill her. But if she's too good of a goddess, the king will kill her. And she quickly finds out that the fate of this entire world is in her hands. So that's Goddess in the Machine. And I've been working, starting 5 years ago. So this has been a really, so I've been really excited about that. And I'm super, like Emily said, we've known each other for a really long time. A lot of times when you have a critique partner, it's kind of like dating, where you have to go through a few before you find a good one. But I got to marry my high school sweetheart, and we have been critique partners from the very beginning. And I keep writing because of Emily's encouragement, but also because I get to see the amazing writing that she does, and it really pushes me to get better as well. And then I'm super excited that Beth is here. So funny story that I ever went to. Before that, I mean, I should have known. I was in my late 20s and I should have figured this out, but I just didn't realize that they did book events. I didn't realize this was a thing that you could go and participate in. And I saw that she was doing an event near the Starbucks that I worked at. And so I was going to change after work and I was going to go see her. And I was so excited. Amazing author. And she came into my Starbucks beforehand, and she came up to order something. And instead of asking for her name, I said, "You're Beth Revis," all creepy like. But she was very nice about it. And then I went to her event afterwards, and it was amazing to get to see an author speak and to have that connection with an author of mine for a really long time. So it's really exciting that both Emily and Spiel. Emily, are you there?
I can't wait until the day when you go to a Starbucks and somebody says, "You're Lora Beth Johnson." So I want to talk to both of you about world building. So I love world building as a sci-fi writer, but I don't create like entire worlds from like scratch like the two of you do, like whole new cultures. I just like take our world and just destroy it a little bit, which is easy. So I want to ask you first, LB, how do you go about creating a whole new society with rituals and culture and make it feel so real? And then I want to hear from you, Beth, about the same thing.
So I mean, and Emily, you read the books that came before this. an entire new world for a really long time because it was a very intimidating prospect. But I started out looking at the environment of the world that we were going to be in. I knew that I wanted to be far in the future.
Hey folks, it looks like we're having some technical difficulties here. Can I get some nodding of heads? If
Main
that's
Street.
all right. I think we'll give Main Street Books. There we go. There we go.
I'm back. Where did you lose me?
Back a little bit, pretty much the beginning of the question. Can we get like a Cliff Notes version of your answer? Sorry.
Yes. So, so yes, it was taking a look at. It keeps telling my internet connection is so unstable. It's because there's so many people here. I'm so excited. Yes, so it was taking a look at this world that was far in the future, that was removed from our culture, but still rooted in our culture. So the fun thing was taking things that are familiar to us, things that we recognize, and just warping them a little bit, because we're looking at those things through new eyes, through people who don't have the same background that we do.
And what about you, Beth? How do you go about creating whole new worlds?
Well, I found it was really interesting that you said that you just kind of took the world that it was and then broke it a little bit, because that's basically what I did. I tell a story about when I wrote Across the Universe, which was my first book. Everything in the first book takes place on a spaceship. Like, they're trapped in a generational spaceship. It's a murder mystery set in space. They are stuck there. And afterwards, my publisher said that he wanted to make a map of the spaceship and put it in the front of the book. So if you have a paperback copy, it's like the very first page of the book. And he said, well, what does it look like on the outside? And I said, I don't know. They don't go outside. If they do, they die. So I definitely have zero idea of how to do anything like planning wise. I just make it up as I go and cross my fingers and hope for the best and see what happens. That's basically my whole approach.
I love it. I love it. Fingers crossed, hope for the best. We shouldn't let on that writing follows these very strict rules of fingers crossed, hope for the best. But in my experience, it does. Yeah, that's how it works. So LB, answer this question. I wanted to ask you, one of the things that's so striking about this book and that is just so genius about this book is the language. So not only did you create a whole society, you created a dialect that's different, but you can actually follow on. It's like, you know, this book is about technology and magical technology, but you've created real magic where you start reading words that you can't understand, and then before you know it, you can understand. And it's just brilliant. Tell me how you did it. I need to know.
Well, thank you very much. So I started writing this book when I was in grad school, and there was a linguistics course that everybody had to take, but I was warned away from this course. Like, everybody was like, it's so hard, you know, you're going to hate it. You're going to be miserable. And so I put it off to the last semester, and I loved it. I loved every minute of it. I loved looking at how words evolve. But the thing that I was especially interested in was how words create reality. So the reality that we experience, which is the only reality we have access to, is shaped by how we talk about it. So the words that we use are constantly creating our reality. That speaking is action. We are putting into action with our words this existence. And so that was something that I found really interesting, and it started seeping its way into the book. And especially with the Iransetians. When I knew I was going to create a culture that was 1,000 years removed from ours, I knew that I couldn't just have them speaking English and being like, okay, there you go. Because if we look back 1,000 years ago, when we tried to read Beowulf, we're like, oh my gosh, what's happening? This is a completely different language. And so likewise, 1,000 years from now, the language is going to be, you know, completely different than what we're familiar with. So I started out, I was like, I'm going to go full Tolkien, and I'm going to create this whole new language, and it's going to be super accurate. And it was unreadable. Like, it was completely, like, it was just, you couldn't connect with it at all. And so I had to make concessions. And I think, Emily, you've talked about with your science, because your science is so believable, but you have to make concessions to authenticity in order for it to be accessible, right? And I found the same thing with language, is that and I had to sacrifice the authenticity in order for it to be accessible to readers. So the way that I worked around that was that we have a dialect that is primarily the English that we speak, but with changes that changes that reflect the world of the society that they're in. So as you know, society creates language, language is also creating society. And so that's where that dialect came from, is how can I create this this language that's creating the society. And so depending on which point of view you're reading from, if you're reading from Andrew's point of view or Jade's point of view, this is either a sci-fi or it's a fantasy. And the only reason that it's different is the language that they use, because the language that they use puts them in alternate realities. So that's my spiel about linguistics.
Like I said, genius. And I saw a question pop up that I have as well. Do you have any favorite dialect terms that the Iransetians use?
So my favorite terms are the ones that also have meaning in our English, but aren't the same meaning. So for instance, instead of a fluke, they say flute. And that that tickles me to no end. Or instead of matter, they say meteor. And things like that, I think, are hilarious. One of the things that actually got cut from the book that I was so proud of myself was instead of crudités, they called them crude eats. And I loved that it ended up like the sounds like devolved into something that actually made sense. But that got cut, so that's not in there. And that's your behind the scenes look for today.
I love it. I feel like I called them crude eats as a kid.
Because that makes more sense to you, right?
Right. Now, I love what you said about how, depending on whose chapter you're reading, it's a fantasy or a sci-fi. And that's just like, it just blew my mind. Like, I knew that it was a fantasy flavored sci-fi, but I never put it together as clearly as that. And you just blew my mind again. Like you're a genius all over again with the way that you've constructed this book. And so my next question, I'm going to throw it to Beth first, but I want to hear from you too, is about fantasy and sci-fi. So depending on who you're talking to, some people view them as the same genre. Some people are like, no, they're completely different. They have totally different rules. Some people read one and only the other, but you both have a foot in both worlds. So Beth, you've written fantasy and you've written sci-fi, and LB, you have merged them together, which is gorgeous. I want to talk about what these genres mean to you, and why you write the genres that you write.
Such a good question. I love, by the way, Lora Beth, that you talked about college, because college had a lot of influence on me as well. I have linguistical things because of my one linguistics class that I had to take in college, and that was it, and then I was done. But that had an influence as well. But also, I think college was where I first realized that I definitely wanted to write science fiction or fantasy, and it was because I took a class, and the professor it was my only creative writing class I ever took, and the professor on the very first day said, you can write about anything you want except for science fiction and fantasy, because we don't want to read any story where you can solve your problems with a magic wand or a ray gun. And 99% of my life is fueled by spite. And so when this man said I could not do it, I said, I shall do the thing. And every story I submitted to him was a fantasy or sci-fi, and I got no higher than a C on any one of them, and that was fine, even though I'm bitter about it to this day. But the point of both science fiction and fantasy is not that you can solve things with a magic wand or a ray gun. It's that even in worlds that have magic wands or ray guns, there are still basic human problems that we have to solve. And it's just that the trappings are different, but the stories are the same. And in a lot of ways, you can highlight new things that you cannot really talk about in our society. You can take a seed of an idea that's a problem now and blow it up to how big of a deal it'll be in future. Or you can take something that we forget about in history and wrap it up in a fantasy setting so that we can explore an idea in much greater depth and talk more about the what ifs and the repercussions of real life actions that we could not necessarily do in other genres. So that's my long-winded spiel. And haha, I'm better published than that professor anyway.
Yeah, I do. I really like how, I don't know, both sci-fi and fantasy, they feel like safe spaces for me to explore not safe things. Right. So, and it's one of the reasons why I prefer to read sci-fi or fantasy, watch sci-fi or fantasy, because it's talking about like the issues that we, are facing every day, but in a way that's just one step removed. So it feels like I can explore these issues in a safer way. And I think the line between sci-fi and fantasy is very thin. I think you can make an argument for, sci-fi, we've got tech, it's in the future, and it's looking like at, the possibilities of human accomplishment, and then fantasy is magic, and it's a lot of times rooted in history. But if you take a look at something like Star Wars, and how it meshes those two things together. You have laser swords and space travel, but at the very beginning, it starts a long time ago, and the Force is magic, right? Like we're all in agreement with that. That's what that is. And so I think Star Wars really started my love for like taking those two genres and kind of just smashing them together and seeing what happens.
That happens to lead me so beautifully to my next question, which is about Star Wars. I happen to know that the two of you are like maybe just a little bit of a fan of Star Wars. LB, I know, because in all the years that I have known and loved you, you have never once shut up about Star Wars. And Beth, you've actually written a novelization of Star Wars. So look, LB, tell me first, and then I want to hear from you, Beth. LB, tell me what Star Wars means to you. Tell me all about it. I'm a Trekkie. I get it, but I don't really get it. So tell me, what's it all about?
Yeah, when I think about our writing, like I always put your
And
brand
how
of
does it with your
sci-fi.
writing?
I always put your brand of sci-fi into Star Trek and then my brand of sci-fi into Star Wars. Like, I think that's kind of, there's so many ways that our writing is so similar, but I think that's like where we differentiate. But I don't actually remember the very first time I watched Star Wars because I was so young. Like, it's always existed in my mind. And I think there's something about, like, you've got science fiction, you've got fantasy, it's very swashbuckling adventure, and it's also really hopeful. Like, even if you take the saddest Star Wars, like even if you look at Rogue One, like there's still so much hope in that, right? And it's just it's fun, and it's great escapism, but it also, like, the stakes are so huge, but we're also focusing in on the personal lives of these characters. Like, it just it encompasses so much. And because it's been such a big part of my life, I can, like, it just shows up in my writing, and it's almost never intentional. Like, I didn't intend to recreate Tatooine, and I didn't intend to make a lot of references that I did to Star Wars. There is one Star Wars reference in the book that nobody has caught yet. Nobody has caught. And I don't think they will, because it's so, like, obscure. But we'll see. We'll see if they do, but I highly, highly doubt. Yes. If anybody, it would be you, Beth. But we'll see. It's so obscure. It's so obscure. It's so weird.
I am now going to have to reread your whole book, looking specifically for this, because I will find it.
Okay.
I will. I am like, I'm really like looking at the door. I'm like, I could maybe run out to my car and drive back to my house and get my book and start reading now. I will find this now. Like, totally challenge accepted. But yeah, like you, I don't remember a time when Star Wars was not a part of my life. My parents had videotaped on VHS the movies when they came out on, like, not public television, but like normal, we used an antenna television. And so I still watch the original 3 movies, and I know where the commercial breaks happened. And every time I watch Return of the Jedi, I'm like, oh, I need Domino's because the Noid told me I needed Domino's now. And like, it's just a Pavlovian instinct at this point. And like, I absolutely remember when my parents built their house, like my brother and I were like beating each other up with PVC pipes, and we were just like, this is a lightsaber, and like totally wailing on each other. But anyway, like you, I really, really like Star Wars. And I do think part of it is this idea that you're in a galaxy far, far away a long time ago, but it is still very human emotions. And you get to explore that on such a larger scale, and it makes it just so much better when you blow it up. And also, Han Solo is hot, and Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia was such an inspiration to me. She was a princess, but also fired a gun, and she also fought back, and that had a big impact on me in ways I don't think I really realized. And then when I became an adult and she became a general, that also had a big impact. Like, it was a whole nother layer of impact where, like, as a little girl, I'm like, oh, she's my princess. Now I'm an adult. Now she's my general. And that's just, it's a powerful thing.
I love it. I love it. I will always, like, when I hear Beth Revis speak in the future, I will always imagine you with that PVC pipe.
Fair.
So the next thing I want to talk about is theme. So I'm working on a new book at the moment, and I'm at that stage where I'm drafting and it's coming along, but I'm like, man, I need to get the theme in the book, because you read about how to write, how to build a story, and everything you read comes back to theme. What's the theme? What's the message? And I just been beating my head against the wall, being like, oh, no, what is the message? You should need to learn this. No, the theme should be this. And I have to remember that every one of my books, I have only figured out the theme when I'm in about 75% of the way through the draft. And then I've had to go back and make sure that it's like feeded in, it almost inevitably is subconsciously all the way through. So what I want to ask is, how do you build themes, and what themes do you find yourself exploring? Is it something that you sit down in the beginning and figure out, or does it come organically through the book? LB, what themes were exploring Goddess, and how did they come about?
I don't know the theme of the book until other people tell me. And I'm like, oh, I guess that was the theme of the book. And I guess I better, make a point of going back and, planting that theme as we go along. My book is packaged and on shelves. And I think I just realized that the theme is Decide Your Fate. I don't think I got that until, today. So it's something that's really just kind of innate. And I think we, especially if you read like a writer, you internalize a lot of things, and then that internalization ends up showing up in your writing. So a lot of it's not intentional, but I can definitely see some patterns emerge in my writing. Like, all of my writing is about death, which is weird. I guess a way that I'm exploring death or whatever, but there's always like an analog for it. So like in Goddess and the Machine, the analog is like the frozen in cryotech. And I think, one of the things that makes me sad is that there will be things that happen after I die, like space travel and amazing literature and music, and that I'll just never get to see. And so I guess that was my wish fulfillment, is that she gets to die, but then be resurrected and experience all these things. And so I think that pops up. But I think language is always going to pop up in my writing, and linguistic stuff. So I'm really unintentional about it. It just kind of comes out as part of me. Beth,
I cannot emphasize enough how I have no idea what I'm doing, and I just start writing and things happen, and I don't know, it just kind of works out. I do know that anytime I purposefully think of a theme before I start writing, the book just becomes totally preachy, and I just start getting obsessed and I circle around with it, and the book is terrible. So I just embrace the fact that I have no idea what I'm doing and write a story, and then usually something happens by the end, and then I have to go back and rewrite it 8 times, and maybe it'll work.
You're in the 8 times club. LB and I are in the 8 times club too.
Oh yeah.
It's a terrible club, eh?
Oh, I hate it. It's the worst.
How many times did you rewrite Goddess, LB?
Rewrite, probably 4, total rewrites.
4? Total rewrites.
But and by total rewrites, I mean, not that I was borrowing from previous drafts, but I scrap the draft and start over. But drafts themselves, gosh, I don't know, 15 maybe. I have no clue.
Yeah, I think people are often shocked when they hear that a writer often will just go back to page 1 and start again and take bits from the previous draft, but start again. Yeah. And often that's what it takes. I've been there. I did the same thing with Moral Coil for sure. Yeah. Hoping not to do it this time around.
I say that every time, and I have yet to actually have that happen.
But Emily has this really cool method now where she writes 30,000 word outlines. So by the time like she has outlined it, like she knows where all the scenes are and what's going to happen. And I wish I could do that. Like I don't know what's going to happen most of the time until I write it. I've tried.
Yeah. I'm a crazy outliner, and I also wanted to talk to both of you about this. So I know a bit of your process, LB, but I'll get you to share it with other people. But I'm someone who's like a reformed pantser. So in the writing world, we talk about plotters and pantsers, where plotters plot out the whole book and pantsers fly by the seat of their pants. And just hearing both of you talk, I'm pretty sure I know Beth's answer. But given that your books are so complex and have such tension and stakes, how do you go about structuring a book?
It's all in the
Did y'all
rewrites.
hear that? Just checking.
So like I just sit down and I start writing and I see what happens, and then everything is going back in rewriting and making sure that that the arcs are settled, that any foreshadowing that needs to be there. So I pants the first draft, but then after that I get really like plotty, and I have big spreadsheets about when everything is happening and following each arc, and when we learn certain pieces of information. So if I could just do that before I write the draft, that would be awesome. But I need to at least write one draft, sometimes two, before I can even get into the structural stuff.
I'm on 8 or 9 books published. I lose count. But I have learned that none of them come out the same way. And some of them I've had to outline. I had to outline my Star Wars novel because they had to approve the outline ahead of time. And that was super stressful, but I was not going to say no to Star Wars. So when they said, give me an outline, I said, yes, sir, and sent them an outline. And then I realized that I was able to write the book much, much faster with it. And so I've sort of evolved to include a loose outline in my work. But I enjoy the surprise of writing. And so I always try to leave myself room where something will happen that I don't necessarily expect. And that kind of gives me that element of surprise. But every single book I've written has been written different from the one before it, even the ones that were sequels.
Great. So as soon as we figure it out, the game's just gonna change on us.
Yes. What a career.
Yeah. So what are you both working on now? LB, what can you tell us about book 2? And Beth, what are you working on at the moment?
Book 2, man, that's something else. Book 2 is really hard because it's the first sequel I've ever written. The first book that I've written where I don't have 5 years to kind of like play around with it. And the first end of a series I've ever written. Because up until this, I've always written like kind of not cliffhanger endings, but open endings. And so there's so many new things. And also it's gonna be on shelves. Like I can't just be like, oh, never mind, let's trunk this and start over. Which Emily knows that I will do that. Like I will get like 75 words into, or 75,000 words into a book and be like, never mind, and start over. I can't do that with this. And so it's a lot of pressure. But one of the things that I've been discovering through writing the sequel to Goddess is that I feel like I've leveled up. And it's the first time that I've really like been able to see myself getting better as a writer. I think up until this point, it's just been like, oh my gosh, I have so much to learn. I have so much to learn. And I'm finally like, oh, I learned that. Like I look at how this draft is so much better than the first draft of Goddess. Like it's, I can see myself getting better, which is really exciting. But also the more that you learn in writing, the more that you realize you don't know. So even as I can see myself getting better, I can also, like, my standards for myself are getting a lot higher. But I can tell you that book 2 is going to be a lot darker. I think that's all I can tell you. I don't think there's anything else I can tell you that won't spoil book 1.
I'm excited and I need it now. So write faster. I am currently working on 4 different projects. I have an adult science fiction that I cannot talk about, but hopefully it'll come out soonish, the information on it. And then I am working on a middle graph about video games and girls and friendship, and a young adult that takes me back into space because I have missed it greatly. And I'm also trying my hand at an adult fiction novel that takes place during the Norman Conquest. So it's been a lot of very strange research happening, but at least it's really interesting.
So I'm really excited that you're going back to space, because I think, like, anybody who's read your Across the Universe series will be able to tell in Goddess in the Machine, like, how much it influenced Goddess in the Machine. Because really, like, the first chapter in Goddess in the Machine is kind of like a I don't know, warped version of Amy waking up and Across the Universe. And I even fit in the words across the universe in that first chapter. So I'm super excited that you're going to go back to space.
Yay. Here's hoping it comes out sometime before the world ends.
I know.
So I want to take a quick look in the chat and take a look at some of the questions people have been asking. And if any of you have, Ellie been saying yes?
I've been handed some questions.
That you want to ask, now's a great time. All right.
So I have a few questions, but you can keep.
Go ahead, Ellie.
So this is from the chat. It says, is your book anything like Clockwork Orange that uses more and more of the new language as the book goes on? No. So what my plan was with the language is that as the book goes on, you should understand it better. So like the first quarter of the book, it should be really confusing to you, but it's going to stay consistent throughout the book. So hopefully by about halfway through, you just know what they're saying, because you've acquired this language the same way that you would acquire a language that you were immersed in. I thought about going full Clockwork Orange, but it is a lot of work. So there's a lot of concessions to the accuracy of how this dialect, which is really kind of a pidgin dialect between English that as we know it and this future language, to make it more accessible and easier to read, so that you're not thinking so much about the language as you are experiencing it. So that's my question that's my answer about that. If you were thrown into Ironsaid, which character would you want to hang with and avoid? So I really want to hang out with Lilibet, because she would make me feel so good about myself. She is such an encouraging character, and I would love hanging out with her, and she could do my hair and makeup, which I hate doing myself. So I would love to hang out with Lilibet. I honestly would avoid Jade. I love Jade to death, but I could only handle him in small doses. I don't think in real life we would get along well. But that's okay, because he doesn't have to get along with me. He has to get along with Andra. So I think I would avoid Shade. What one thing do you wish you had known prior to writing this first book that you could take to second book? Um, all I can think of is like, I wish I had known how hard taxes are. But that has nothing to do with writing. like, so that is a terrible answer. I think I wish that and I still don't know this, I wish that I could figure out how to work on the kind of schedule that you need to work on in publishing. Because before you're published, like, you can take your time, nobody gives you deadlines, and you could rewrite as many times as you want until you get it exactly the way that you want it. And then in book 2, they're like, okay, you've got 2 months, send us something. And that is just not something that my brain was ready for. So I think if I had spent more time with book 1 learning how to work on those deadlines and really push myself into a new way of writing where I'm not, because a lot of my process is like, I know this isn't going to work, but I'm going to spend like 20,000 words writing this just to see what happens. And then I'm going to go back and erase it and try something else. And I don't really have time to do that now. And so like learning how to explore things without having to write it out, like learning how to explore things in my brain. I would love to learn that lesson, but also, yes, I definitely need to learn how taxes as a writer works. They make no sense.
I'm really interested in your answer to that question too. What's something that you've learned that you wish you could go back and tell yourself as a writer?
Were you asking me? It cut out.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Beth. Yeah.
Definitely, taxes was a huge one. I was very, very lucky that somebody told me that whatever you get for an advance, you should just take 50% of it and stick it in a different account and then assume you'll have to pay it in taxes. And I've done that the whole time, and that was fortunate for me because I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm like, here's this.
You write those checks and you're like, oh my gosh, like I've never spent this much money in my entire life. Like, here you go.
And then you got to buy your own health care.
That's why I have my second job.
I have thought about going back to teaching just for the healthcare, like just that. I think I would have told myself to be more open to new ideas, because I definitely started off my career thinking like, this is the path and this is what you do. But there are so many different options and different ways to do it. And like, you don't have to put yourself in a box. And I'm very quick to put my own self in a box of like, oh, I write this type of book, but I could actually explore it and write something totally different. And I think if I had been able to break through that a little bit quicker and just realize how much can be changed in the course of art making in general, I would have been better off if I had figured that out sooner.
That's really inspirational. Thank you. So fielding for any more questions, but while you're all thinking of a couple questions for LB, I have one more question here about alternating perspectives. So LB, Goddess is written in alternating perspectives, and Beth, I know this is something you've done as well. And it's something I did for the first time in the third book in the Mortal Coil series, in This Vicious Cure, which was a hell of a thing to try doing for the first time on the third book of a series. I don't recommend. How do you go about crafting two characters?
So Emily, you did it beautifully. It was so good. It was so good. If you guys haven't, I mean, don't even buy my book, buy Emily's book. Like, it's like, if that's what you're going to do today, buy Emily's book, because it's just, that whole series is just incredible. But I think the easy thing for me, like with writing dual POV, is one of my characters, even though I'm writing in third person, I'm writing in a very close third person. one of my characters speaks this made up dialect. So it's really easy to get the voice down when they are speaking two separate dialects. And that was my cheat, is I just gave one of them a different dialect. But I think it's a lot of looking at the world through their perspective and seeing what kind of metaphors they would use, like what kind of animals and games and things like that would they reference, and incorporating that into the perspective so that it's easy to differentiate whose point of view we're reading from. But also I think it's really important with dual point of view is that you're telling two separate arcs. Like they each have their own story. You're not telling the same story. They each have it's in the same story, but they each have their own arc, their own thing that they're trying to accomplish, and their own obstacles getting in their way. Beth, your thoughts?
I'm very similar to that. I call it the lens, and I almost pretend like I'm putting on a different pair of glasses for the next character. So I'm writing with one pair of glasses for one character, and I'm looking at the world through her lens, and then I swap and I write for another character, and it's just different ways of how they would see a lens. I like to give the example of a knife in the Hunger Games, that Katniss would see a knife and see one thing, and Peeta would see a knife and go, oh, I can cut a cake. So, I mean, there's very different ways that they'll look at the exact same object, and I try to keep that in mind. And then the metaphors and things like that. I also like to think of what secrets they have, because everybody has a secret, and it may never come out on the page, but I know at least one secret for every character, and that shapes the way they react and talk about things, and that kind of helps me figure it out.
Mm-hmm. And their personality too, because like with Andra, she's so guarded. So everything that's on the page is really filtered through how guarded she is. Jade is not guarded, but he has a very specific, like you said, lens that he's looking at things through. So whereas a lot of his thoughts end up on the page, the way that they end up on the page is different. So I think, the way that they even communicate comes through with the different POVs as well.
And even if they want the same thing, they'll want it for a different reason. Mm-hmm. And whatever the difference is between them, that's what you latch onto.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like
Emily,
taking real.
How was it for you? Like how was it for you to write two POVs?
I wrote it in a blind panic. I don't know. I just hoped it came out on the page.
It was brilliant. It was brilliant.
Thank you. The question came through in the chat. Who's your favorite character to write?
I really like Lilibet because I don't have to edit any of her dialogue. Just whatever pops into my head ends up on the page, and then it's there. Like, because she just, whatever's in her head comes out, and so I don't have to edit it back down. Jade is also really fun to write because it's like all of those arrogant things that you would never say, like you finally get to say through somebody else's voice. So he's super fun to write, even if I wouldn't want to hang out with him because he would annoy me.
I love it. So I think we've pretty much come to the end of our questions here, and LB is going to do some live signings for people who are purchasing through the store. I'm going to hand things back over to Main Street Books, but I want to thank Beth and LB and all of you for showing up and celebrating the launch of this amazing book. I love it so much, and I'm so happy that it's in the world.
Thank you so much, Emily and Beth, for joining me. It means the world to me. Like I said, it's super special to me that I got to share this with you guys. And also thank you everybody for coming to my book launch. It was awesome. So we are going to attempt a live signing, and Ada is going to explain how we're going to do this.
Okay, so I have to put your mic. Hi, thanks so much. If you made yourself a drink, let's do a toast real quick. All right, a toast to Goddess in the Machine and this incredible community of people that have helped Lora Beth to this point. Cheers. Yay!